Tonight, as far as late night goes, Dave's had better shows, but Jerry Vale smooths things over for guests Robert Klein and Sinead O'Connor. Then later, from the heart of the Woodstock Nation and Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, Graham Nash.
The infighting, the backstabbing, it means nothing to us. The music is what will last.
Thanks for staying up later. I'm Bob Costas. Tonight, an opportunity I'm really looking forward to. We'll talk about some of the history of rock and roll with Graham Nash. And before we get into that, let's take a look at the video from the American Dream album, the first Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young album in 18 years. The musical harmonies of Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young are much acclaimed, but it's no secret that there was a lot of personal disharmony from time to time.
Absolutely. You ever fight with your brothers?
I don't have any brothers. I used to fight with my sister.
Yeah, sibling rivalry on an intense level. But you've got four people who are very intense, very opinionated, very strong about the way that they want to do things, the way they want to hear their own particular music. It's just like a family.
Just like a family, or even more intense in that regard? I mean,
even
intense to the point where sometimes you have to say, I can't take it anymore.
Yeah, we did that for many years. We've started albums, almost completed them, and just walked away from it. We've always only wanted to make music when we loved each other dearly enough to be true to the muse of music. And sometimes it just wasn't there, and we knew it. But we had the strength to walk away from it and not be forced to make albums that we didn't want to make. That's one of the great things about Atlantic Records. They truly understood that, that this was a special bunch of people, that they should leave us alone and let us make the music, and they would take it when it came. In '69, when we first signed with them, we signed for 6 albums. We still haven't done 6. And Ahmet Ertegun and the people in Atlantic have been kind enough to keep the corporate lawyers away from us, because they had every right to force us to make records, but they wouldn't be able to do that, and they know it.
That must have been an interesting dynamic, especially in the late 60s and early 70s. Rock and roll guys, much more on the edge then than they appear to be now, coming out of Woodstock Nation, but having to deal with guys who I guess stereotypically were guys in shiny suits with pinky rings and big cigars just trying to turn out records.
That's true in almost every case other than Ahmet Ertegun. Ahmet is truly a music man. He's a writer and a producer, and he knows quality when he sees it. And he kept everybody away from us, and it's to his credit. That's why this new record is with Ahmet. You know, after all these years, after 18 years, we went back to Ahmet because we were loyal to him, because he was loyal to us.
On a new record like American Dream, 20 years after your greatest fame, how much of the chemistry naturally exists, and how much do you have to work to put back in place?
We don't have to work at chemistry with this band. It's like Crosby says, it's like juggling 4 bottles of nitroglycerin. You know, you drop one and it's all over, except that this year there were no tops on the bottles. And it was very interesting. First of all, we managed to get right back to where we left off, which was an amazing thing. And second of all, I think we'd grown up a little, we'd matured a little, we were much more compassionate with each other, much more understanding, you know. It didn't bother me that Stephen put a F chord into my C chord, you know, which happened, you know, several years ago, and we didn't speak to each other for a couple of years. Silly things like that. We were much better at it this time.
Were you always the most tolerant of the 4, the least confrontational? I think of an album like Deja Vu, where it's easy to distinguish which is the signature song of each.
Yes.
Deja Vu is Crosby's, and obviously, for obvious reasons, Sweet Judy Blue Eyes is Stills, and Neil Young's, at times, abrasive, confrontational style is right there in Ohio. The anger jumps out at you.
Yep.
And then your song is Teach Your Children, which was one of the most conciliatory songs of a very volatile time.
Yeah. We're very, very different people. And the fact that we make music together astounds me even today. I don't know what the hell these 4 people are doing together. It doesn't make sense, but it does.
What role have you played in trying to get David Crosby back on the relatively straight and narrow?
It's a good question. I love David dearly. I find him to be a fascinating man. He's brilliant. He's very, very different than me. When he was at the depths of his, let's say, depression, I tried everything to get him off drugs. I tried doing more drugs than he did. I tried doing none at all. I tried everything. And it was only when Crosby himself turned himself into the FBI and made the decision to go for life instead of death that I began to realize it was only David could do it. None of his friends could do it. The intervention that we did with you know, 12 of his closest friends meant nothing.
All at one time? These
all at one
dozen
time.
Came together?
Oh, yeah.
Who was there?
Well, myself and Jackson Brown, Grace Slick, Paul Kantner, Carl Gottlieb, who wrote David's autobiography with him, a bunch of other people, all sat him down one day. Oh, God, I'll never forget it. I'm sitting in David's living room, pretty much like this in Mill Valley. There's 12 of us. We know what's going to happen. He's coming off the road, and I can hear him walking up the path going, "Oh, boy, it's good to be home. Oh, boy," and he opens the door. "Oh, God." And there we were. And we said, "David, come and sit down. We all have something we want to say to you." But it didn't work. I mean, 12 of his closest friends, you know, told him personally for, you know, 10 minutes each how much he had hurt them and, you know, what he meant to them personally. And his response was to go into the bathroom and freebase cocaine some more. And it was infuriating. Jackson Brown took him the next day on a private jet down to a treatment center in Southern California. He walked out after an hour. Couldn't handle it. They wanted to separate him and Jan, and that was the worst thing that could have happened for them, right? You know, because they only really had each other, and they left. But David made the decision in Florida to turn himself in, and he ended up doing a year in jail. And I'll never say that jail is good for anybody, but it certainly saved David's life. And so what role did I play? I played his friend. I loved him. I wanted him to be alive. I wanted him to keep creating music that meant so much not only to me, but to many other people. So I tried to be his friend.
When you look back now on the relatively short history overall of rock and roll, but it's the history of a lifetime in your case, do you regret the drug involvement? Not how much you might have personally been involved, but the fact that there was a period of time when rock and roll almost glorified drug use.
That's absolutely true. And did I regret it? I didn't. I don't regret anything I've ever done. Not at all. Because whatever it is that I've done, whatever I've been through, whatever experiences have happened to me, I am here right now talking to you. I'm still alive. I'm still creative. I still feel effective in my society. I still feel I can change the world. I have 3 great kids and a beautiful wife. My life is fantastic. So whatever I did brought me to this point. So I can never regret it.
When David Crosby finally emerged from prison, what was the post-prison reunion like?
Phenomenal. I was doing a solo tour and headed for Texas. I arrived at the airport in Houston and expected to be met by somebody from the place that I was playing, and there was Crosby. And I hardly recognized him at first. He put on a lot of weight. Of course, his hair was short. His mustache had been cut. But he was standing there, smiling. And I played the show that night. There's a part in the show where I've always, I play Wind on the Water, which was a song I wrote for the Great Whales. And preceding it, there's an a cappella vocal piece that Crosby wrote called Critical Mass. And the two have always been linked. And no matter whether I've been playing a show with David or not, I always, you know, put the 2 pieces of music together. Lights go out. These beautiful voices come on. People know that it's the beginning of Wind on the Water. The curtain opens, and the entire place falls down. Because they recognize Crosby's silhouette. And he comes out in the dark, and it was so overwhelming that we were almost in tears. And I, you know, really, truly, almost. It was triumphant for David. He had made it back to living. He had fought off a very bad time in his life. He was back, and everybody knew it. And it was, if anybody was there at that concert that night, they saw a very special night.
If I went to one of your concerts, what would I see in the audience? Is your audience people who first hooked onto you when they were in their teens or early 20s, or can you reach people who are that age now?
Our audiences are between 14 and 42. And I don't know how it is, but the 14-year-old kids know all the words to the songs. Their mothers, their brothers, their sisters. It does me, gives me a great feeling, because it means that the music, which has always been the most important part of us, the infighting, the backstabbing, it means nothing to us. The music is what will last. It'll last beyond our fighting, it will last beyond bad reviews from Rolling Stone, it'll last beyond all of it, hopefully. And when 14-year-old kids who were conceived after some of the songs were conceived, sing the words to those songs, it makes me feel great as a musician.
Which of your songs makes you feel best? Maybe you can't narrow it down to any one.
I can narrow it down very much. It's always the one that I'm writing now. It's always the one that is on the edge of coming into creation. When you've written songs, you know, you have to let them go. You record them and you let them go out of your system, and it gives me more room inside for more creation. But the song that I always love is the one I'm writing right now.
The American Dream album.
Yeah, good piece of work.
We'll hold it up so you see it, folks.
You look like David Letterman when you do that.
The inspiration behind it
was born very much out of the feeling that we talked about earlier with Crosby coming out of jail. Neil called Crosby one day and said, listen, you know, I'd like to make music with you, but I just can't tolerate this situation. If you ever manage to get straight and free of drugs, I'd like to make another album. And it was a great carrot for David to do. Now, that's not the reason why he straightened up, but it certainly was one of the reasons why American Dream came into being. We went to Neil's ranch, which is in Northern California. We sequestered ourselves away for about 11 weeks and had a wonderful time.
In the video, the American Dream video, you're surprised in bed by an almost assaultive guy with a guitar, and he puts his foot on your chest, and whoa!
That's the first time my kids ever met Neil. They'd heard about him for years, of course, and that was the first time they'd ever met him, and to see him in that punk rocker outfit was insane. I took my kids down to the set, and when my son Jackson saw me in bed with that blonde, he looked over at me and he goes, hey, Dad, you scored.
He's 10?
Yeah. He's a very bright 10.
You run into people routinely now who like your music, but who politically, culturally, in terms of their own lives, are completely on the outside of what you were talking about. I mean, I imagine there are people who listen to your music.
That's an interesting point.
Who listen to your music who voted for Richard Nixon.
I never met any. I really never did. I never met anybody that I know that voted for Nixon.
Or who, let me rephrase it, who would vote for George Bush today, or would have voted for Ronald Reagan?
Well, there's room for everything, you know. Maybe George Bush is going to turn out to be a great president. He's certainly saying some right words, you know, whether it's backed up with correct action, you know, we'll have to
my point is not to criticize George Bush, only to say that it seems to fall in a different part of the cultural spectrum.
It sure does.
And yet rock and roll now has been homogenized to the point where it spreads out across the culture. I mean, it's nothing to hear people proclaim honestly that no, they love the Beatles, and their fondest notion is to become vice president of their corporation as quickly as they possibly can.
Yeah, it's a strange phenomenon, isn't it? You know, rock and roll has been assimilated into the society in a much deeper level than I ever thought it would. I mean, when you get, you know, Elvis imitators doing the halftime show at the Super Bowl, you know, we've come a long way.
Isn't one of your songs used in an appliance commercial?
Right now, yeah. Sears Kenwood. I try and don't believe that I haven't heard from Neil about this. It's an interesting case, actually. I did sell the rights for them to be able to use Our House as a song. Mm-hmm. I did not give them the rights to sound exactly like CSNY, and that's Neil's point. It's a very good point, and I support him very much on this. He feels that they stepped over the bounds of what they were allowed to do by sounding exactly like... He thought it was me that had done the commercial. You know, that's how much it sounded like CSNY. And so it's all going on. He's sitting at home trying to figure out what he's going to do next.
You came out of the Hollies, Crosby out of the Byrds, Stills and Young. We're in Buffalo, Springfield. I mean, already, each of you comes to this with pretty good credentials.
Yes.
It's fairly amazing that four personalities that strong and that accomplished already can mesh that way.
Yeah, and it's not surprising that sometimes we don't mesh, you know. After all, it was me that wrote Wasted on the Way. We have wasted a lot of time in our lives. We have let a lot of music slip underneath the bridge, and it's one regret that I do have.
Wasted on the Way is specifically about that?
Yes, specifically for David and Stephen. And myself, of course. I can't divorce myself from the fact that I'm one of these people.
What's your relationship with Stills and the relationship Stephen has with the other members of the band? There is, and I always hesitate to embrace what you read about somebody. I don't know the man myself, but you read that he can be difficult.
Stephen can be intolerable. But there's a side of Stephen that is totally lovable. The man is a brilliant songwriter and a brilliant musician. And sometimes he has difficulty with his personal life, you know. Sometimes he has difficulty seeing reality. Sometimes he gets a little hung up in the image of who Stephen Stills is rather than who the person that Stephen is. The same person that made it impossible to make some of the music was the same person that walked up 38 steps to my house in Los Angeles with a complete lamb dinner when my wife was sick in bed one day and spread it out before us and left. There are sides of Stephen that are totally lovable, and there are sides of Stephen I can't tolerate.
Wasn't he once quoted as saying, and probably just a careless thing that he said, but he referred to you guys as his backup band?
Stephen is, I feel, has always felt that David and I were his backup singers. But it's, that's only what, you know, part of Stephen believes. You know, he's a very complex man. He really is. You should have him on here one day. He's a very complex man.
Stephen, here's the invitation. You can sit in this very same overstuffed chair and say just about anything you want for half an hour. We'll stop and come right back. When I was 18, 19 years old, I wouldn't have dreamed that one of the four would jump right off the album cover someday and be seated across from me. It's an opportunity I can't resist. So we've asked Graham Nash to come back tomorrow night and pick up right where we've left off. The history will continue, and we'll see you later.
Your dreams, the one they picked, the one you know by.
Thanks again for staying up later. I'm Bob Costas. It's been 24 hours since we left off with Graham Nash, but believe it or not, 20 years since Woodstock. Graham Nash was a part of that, of course. Now, they're holding all the footage from Woodstock for a 20th anniversary film that's coming out this summer. So we can't show you the Sweet Judy Blue Eyes performance from 1969. We can, though, to get you in the mood for another session with Graham Nash, show you CSNY from the early 80s with Sweet Judy Blue Eyes, the Stephen Stills classic. That song was one of several that you performed at Woodstock. 20 years ago, 1969, to what extent does any portion of what was romantically viewed as Woodstock Nation, to what extent does that still exist?
I think it exists a great deal. I think it exists in the spirit of people. You've got to remember all the people that were young and hip and cool then have now become, you know, TV announcers, TV directors, film producers, bankers. They have assimilated themselves into the system now and take some of that spirit with them and change their lives from the inside of the business now.
But as much of that spirit as people might have hoped, remember that's during that whole Woodstock greening of America generation, and yet a lot of people our age, roughly our age, voted for George Bush. They voted for Ronald Reagan.
That's a terrifying thought, isn't it? I didn't.
You're not an American citizen, though, right?
Yes, I am.
Oh, you are?
Oh, yeah. I wanted, you know, many years ago I figured out that if I was going to make comments about this country, about the bad things that are going on here, and about the good things that are going on here, I felt a little hypocritical if I wasn't a part of the place itself. And so I became an American citizen in '84, I think.
What are your recollections of Woodstock, the whole scene that surrounded it?
Rain, mud, marijuana, color, a lot of music, a lot of confusion, almost being killed in the helicopter getting in there, lots of fires, flying over a crowd the size of which I'd never seen before in my life. being somewhat scared, not because of the amount of people that were in front of us, but the kind of people that were backstage watching us. Because we'd all been, you know, David and Steve and I and Neil had all been in groups before, and we'd all handled lots of people before. So that wasn't nerve-wracking as much as the people that played at Woodstock wanting to see who this new band was. Because you must remember, the record had been #1 for a couple of months, and no one had ever seen us live. And so people were trying to figure out who these guys were.
That's Deja Vu at this point?
No, this was the first Crosby, Stills and Nash record, with Marrakesh Express on it and things like that. And so being scrutinized by our peers was making us nervous.
Recreate that scene. Some of the people that were there. Jimi Hendrix was there. Country Joe and the Fish were there.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of daunting for, as you say, for another musician to perform in front of the top echelon of his or her peers.
It is, because we knew that we were relatively new, although we'd done many years of making records before in the Hollies and the Buffalo Springfield and the Byrds. But this was something very strange and very special. When we first came to New York to go out there to do it, the rumors were that there were 20,000 people going to turn up, and that was, you know, a big deal, 20,000 people. And then daily, it changed until it ended up that people said there were going to be about 500,000 people there. And so something was happening. It was as if the thing had taken a life of its own, and the media were covering it in a way that they never normally covered a rock concert. You know, so it really was very special. Something was going on there at Woodstock that was, would turn into myth.
Afterwards, Joni Mitchell wrote the song that pretty much was the anthem of Woodstock, but she wasn't there.
No, she was sitting in a hotel in New York City. We were boyfriend and girlfriend at the time. And Elliot Roberts, who managed CSNY and Joni, made the decision with Joni that she was going to have to stay in the city because she was going to do the Dick Cavett show. And it was a big deal at the time, as you may remember. And so when 500,000 people were supposed to turn up, Elliot, smart as he is, obviously figured out that it would be murder to try and get out of there. And there was nothing that was going to interfere with Joni's shot on the Dick Cavett show, so she didn't go. And from the information that we bombarded her with when we got back to the hotel, she had 4 of her best friends here just babbling about this thing that had gone on, this event in their lives that was so important, that she managed to be the great artist that she is and write Woodstock on just the information that she got from the media and from us.
When 2 great artists are lovers, and it's at a certain point in their life when they're both under intense public scrutiny and they're both in the midst of a creative burst, what are the pluses and minuses of that kind of liaison?
The minuses are that you can never get to the piano. That's one thing.
But once you get there, you're inspired.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I wrote many fine songs about that woman. She is one of the most brilliant, smartest women I know. She's a very... do you know her at all?
No.
She's a really wonderful person. The minuses, I think living under the public microscope, living under the magnifying glass of being in the public eye like we were, it's very hard to be normal. It's very hard to react normally to situations. And so things sometimes get a little out of hand. Small things become magnified. You know, I remember a show in Copenhagen once with CSNY, and we were a little anti-establishment, you know. I mean, that was our reputation at least. And Joni came up to me and Davey one night and she said, you know, you should not put down America so badly, you know. And we ended up in this argument, and she poured a bowl of cornflakes and milk over my head, and in front of everybody. And if it wasn't so hysterical, you know, it was like I Love Lucy in a way. But she was a great lady.
Rolling through the night here with Graham Nash. We talked about Joni Mitchell before, and we've talked about David Crosby. Now the 3 of you come together in, I guess, the classic love triangle at one point. I leave it to you.
Oh, triad, yes. Crosby wrote the song. Yeah, it's true. Joni was David's girlfriend at one point, and David told me that she was going to come see me in Canada, and We were playing a show in Toronto, I believe, in the mid-'60s, late '60s. And there was this beautiful woman sitting in the hotel room where there was a party being thrown by the local radio station for a Hollies concert. And she was sitting there in this kind of pale blue gray dress with what looked like a large Bible on her knee. And that was intriguing. So this woman proved to be a great friend and a fine person in my life. I'm very proud of the time that we spent together, and I have David to thank for that.
He was quoted as saying, look, I love both of them, so why should I be upset that they wound up loving each other?
Yeah.
But that's a pretty giving attitude. And it's one thing to feel that intellectually. Everybody can understand that intellectually. Emotionally, most people couldn't get there.
No, but you see, Crosby's a very special person. He meant it. He's an incredibly knowing person. He saved my life in many respects. When I was upset with the Hollies, you know, that I was writing things like Lady of the Island and Marrakesh Express, and they didn't want to record them, you know. Crosby, you know, when that happens to you, I'm sure you would understand, you begin to question your own sanity. Well, maybe these songs aren't good. Maybe I'm just worthless. Maybe I'm, you know. And Crosby was there at the right moment saying, you know, don't think that way. These are good songs. Come over to America. I have someone that you should meet. And he saved my life in many ways.
In their own way, the Hollies stuff, even though it was stuff that you eventually wanted to break away from, and understandably so, on its own terms, the Hollies were a good pop group.
Yes,
Bus
indeed.
Stop, Carousel, Carrie Ann, those are good songs.
Good pop songs, yeah. But, you know, there's more to life than Wham Bam in the back of the car, you know? There's more to life than that, and that's what I was searching for in the late '60s. When I was smoking a lot of dope, they were drinking a lot of beer. And what happens is that you become different people. You know, I was searching for deeper meaning. I was searching for forms of expression that would reach out to a much wider audience and mean more. You know, I'd done 8 years of pop songs like that, and pop songs, good pop songs, yes, absolutely. I'm very proud of the stuff that I did with the Hollies, or the majority of it. But there's more to life. And Crosby was one of the people that showed me that there was more to life.
The Hollies were contemporaries of the Beatles, and you personally knew the Beatles well.
Well,
enough.
Who knows anybody well? But yeah, we did hang out for a little. We did play concerts together occasionally. They were unbelievable people. They would walk into a room and the entire female population would just fall on the floor. And they hadn't done anything. When those guys walked into a room in their black leather overcoats, it was a special moment. You knew that something very special was going on. And then, of course, when they played, it was very obvious that these people were totally unique. I first saw them in, I think, 1959 at a talent show that me and Alan Clark, who later formed the Hollies with me.
What were they then? The Moondogs then? Or?
Johnny and the Moondogs, yeah. Great people.
What were they like in '59? Were the seeds of
Yes.
what eventually became their popularity
Yeah, the
already
first
sown?
thing I ever saw them do was a Buddy Holly song called Think It Over.
Yeah.
And you knew. They were just, you just know. I think it's very obvious if you keep your eyes open that greatness when it appears before you is obvious, I think. And in their case, it was very, very true.
When someone is a creative person, and you personally and the group that you've been involved with, groups you've been involved with, have a large portfolio. But when you take a look at a group like the Beatles, and they had a period of time of 3 or 4 years, 5 years, where incredible stuff seemed to flow from them almost at will. How does a fellow professional view that from the outside?
I think you have to view it with a sense of humor. Their escape from Liverpool, from the syndrome of doing what your father did and what his father did and what his father did before him and getting a gold watch and lying down and dying, they escaped from that. They helped a lot of other people escape from that. I'm very sure that the success of the Beatles is one of the reasons why the Hollies were successful. They opened a door. A lot of people ran screaming through that door. And I'll be very grateful to them for the rest of my life. They have no idea, of course, you know, or maybe they do. But they changed life for many, many people.
I got a look at an old Hollies video just the other day, and it's obvious that you fellas came up with an onstage configuration that exactly mirrored the Beatles.
I think that that was more than just us doing that. I think that was the people that were shooting it on television. I think it was the people that wanted to emulate what was successful at the time. Yeah. We were a good band. The Hollies were pretty good.
Back with Graham Nash. Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young in their various combinations were a prototypical group of that period of time, the late 60s, early 70s. Your songs were anthems. I remember at Syracuse University, where I went to school, you could not walk across campus for a period of 2 or 3 years. You couldn't take a walk of more than 5 minutes without hearing one of your songs coming from some dormitory window or whatever. Were you fellas aware at that time of the niche that you would have within the history of that generation?
I would say that we had somewhat of an inkling, yes. We felt that the music was important. You know, now it's not Beethoven, it's not Mozart. You know, who knows how history will treat us? But at the time, we felt that we, as musicians, were tapping into something within ourselves that made it very obvious for people to understand that we were the same as them. When you were putting on the records in Syracuse University, listening to the songs that we recorded and wrote, I think it was very easy to identify with those songs and say, wow, I understand exactly what they're saying. I've been through that moment. Yeah, I feel the same way about Kent State. Yes, Chicago was, something that should never have happened. Yeah, I fell in love the same way. Mm-hmm. We wrote songs from our own experiences that obviously people could totally relate to.
Tell me about how Ohio came to being, because that really jumped out like that. It wasn't a long time in the making.
That was art happening now. We had a single, it was my song, Teach Your Children, going up the charts, and Kent State happened. And when Neil, who was in Pescadero in Northern California, a cabin I had in the woods with Crosby, saw the footage on the news of the 4 students being shot by the National Guard.
And that one famous picture of the girl standing over the kid's body and just kind of gesturing toward the sky.
Yeah, terrifying. A very sad moment, especially because they were protesting something, that they had every right to protest, given the right by the Constitution, Neil walks out into the woods. He comes back an hour later with Ohio. He plays it for David. David called me on the phone. I was in Los Angeles with Stephen. He said that Neil had written this incredible song that we had to record. They came down the next day. Because of who we were and our power, because of the amount of plasticware that we sold at the record company, we were able to book studio immediately. We walked in. We recorded Ohio. We figured out that we needed a B-side. Stephen had a song called Find the Cost of Freedom, which seemed most appropriate. Ahmet Ertegun, who was then the president of Atlantic Records, was at the session. We mixed it there. We mixed the B-side. We gave him the tape, and it was out on the street in 10 days.
Tin Soldiers and Nixon coming. How is the America you might have envisioned, that you thought you were part of changing in the late 60s, early 70s, how is it like what you thought would happen and you might have hoped for, and how is it not 20 years later?
That's an interesting question. I think I realized after all this time that you cannot change things overnight, that it takes a lot of work and a lot of energy from a lot of people to change the momentum of a nation. And it's happened. The American people did stop the Vietnam War. They did put pressure on the Congress and the administration to help stop that war. They did put a serious dent in the domestic nuclear power policy of this country in the late 70s and early 80s. They did make it okay to be individual in this country. How is it not changing? It just never works fast enough for me. I'm 47 years old now, and it's an important birthday for me. My father died at 46, so I spent my 46th year wondering whether I would make it to 47. It doesn't work fast enough for me. I don't feel as if I have enough time to accomplish everything that I'm trying to do in all forms of my life.
All the famous rockers of that period of time are in their 40s or in their 50s. if they're still with us. And the question is frequently raised, can somebody keep rocking at that age, or does it reach a point where it's a contradiction?
I think you need to talk to the Mills Brothers. I think you need to talk to Bing Crosby. I think you need to talk to, you know, people like that. I don't see any reason why, if the music is there and there's great point to the music, why it can't be made, you know, forever.
But their music was not so much about a sensibility. It didn't grow out of a set of circumstances as much, to a certain extent it did, but as much as rock and roll did.
Maybe not, maybe not. But I'll still be going until they put me in the coffin. I swear, I'll be knocking on the lid saying, I have one more song.
Graham Nash has been so gracious and forthcoming, taking us through some of the history of the last quarter century in rock and roll. Let's talk about the future as we say so long. What's ahead for you?
Oh, I'm making a record with David. I figure while we've got one in the top 20, we might as well make another record. So that's going to come out soon. I'm going to spend the majority of this year concentrating on my own photography, of maybe putting a book together, maybe putting a show together, working with my computer.
What sort of subjects for your photography?
Anything that tickles my fancy. No particular, you know, thing, just something that makes me feel good.
Young was added later, but when it was just Crosby, Stills, Nash, who decided and how did you decide in what order you went?
I think that we were smart enough to put it in the order that it rolled off the tongue easily. If you try and put them in any other combination, it just doesn't work as well. It just doesn't.
Graham, thank you very much.
My
it's been
pleasure,
a great
Bob.
pleasure.
Thank you.
See you later.
Join us tomorrow night for Basketball Banter with Indiana's coach, Bobby Knight.
Take a few deep breaths and relax before Richard Lewis gets here. Plus, the first late-night appearance by Kevin Bacon.
Recommended viewing by the Association of Circus and Carnival People.
And later, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is just waiting for David Crosby.
Yep, I might even be the first one. He said, hopefully.
Well, they got to build it first.
Thanks for staying up later. David Crosby is with us. On January 16th, he went into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as a member of the Byrds. And you might make it a double because it's likely that sometime down the road, Crosby, Stills, and Nash, Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young, however we want to refer to it, would get in as well, so you'd be in under two banners.
Yep, I might even be the first one. He said, hopefully.
What is the musical significance, in your view, of the Byrds? What's their slot in history?
Well, we were a synthesis band. We were the first American rock and roll band to answer the British invasion and be affected by it. You know, the Beach Boys had already set their style before any of that happened. We were the first reaction to it. And we all came out of, McGuinn and Hillman and I, and Gene Clark also, came out of folk music. So we were into more than just three-chord changes on a guitar. We're into folk music kind of changes, and again, good words, you know, lyrics.
Classic example, of course, the biggest Byrds hit, Mr. Tambourine Man, where you had the energy and an electric sound that seemed to borrow from a British group like the Beatles, for example.
There was definitely influence.
And the folk influence, obviously, written by Dylan.
Yeah, it was definitely influenced by the Beatles. We thought the Beatles, and we probably still do. I think if you asked all of us, you know, who was the best of all, we would probably all still say the Beatles. Some
members of the Byrds said at that time that they were disenchanted with you and felt you were hard to get along with.
I was.
Your version of the main reason why you left the Byrds is that they weren't giving you a chance to spread your wings musically, that you were writing what you thought were good songs and you were getting aced out of slots on records.
Well, I think it was some of both. You know, I was a young kid and I was, you know, possessed of a large and blossoming ego, and I thought, you know, that I should be, you know, given more attention. But the truth was, my real position in that group was wingman to Roger. The Byrds essentially...
To Roger McGuinn.
...was, you know, led by and focused on Roger McGuinn, and properly so. That's how it worked. And that's, you know, had I been content with that, I probably would have stayed with it.
And one outward example of that is you couldn't get Triad onto, which album was it, the Notorious Byrd Brothers? Was that the one that...
Well, you know, yeah, it didn't go on the record, but we did cut it, and we cut it very well, actually. I heard it later, and we did a very good cut of it. I don't think it was really a central thing to the issue. I think I told people that afterwards to, you know, to make me look good.
What I was getting at is this, though. There's a release of the Byrds' greatest hits, or whatever the compilation is called.
The box set?
A new CD, yeah. And Triad is on there.
Yeah,
so it's kind of a nice resolution to the story.
Yeah. That box set, I think, is a nice resolution to a lot of things. We put a lot of effort into it, particularly Roger put a lot of effort into it, and it shows most of the facets that are interesting about that band. You know, its different incarnations.
Now, how about Crosby, Stills, and Nash? Where's their slot?
We did something, again, that was, you know, a lucky piece of timing. At that time, it was the year of the guitar player. It was Clapton and Hendrix and Jimmy Page. And everybody was just discovering the real power of the electric guitar. And we came out in the middle of all of that with acoustic guitars and three-part harmony. Really good three-part, he said modestly.
The story goes that CSNN were formed one day at Joni Mitchell's house. Does that make for a good story, or is it actually on the money?
You know, I can't remember whether it was Joni's house or Cass's house. Cass Elliot was also a very close friend of ours, and is the one who introduced Graham and I. And I'm not sure if it happened at Joni's or Cass's. What happened was Stephen and I had been hanging out for a while. I was out of the Byrds, and Stephen's Springfield had kind of fallen apart around his ears, and we liked each other. We were both brash, young, you know, singers-songwriters looking for some way to bust loose. And we were singing some songs together, you know, his and mine. And we heard Nash in the Hollies and said, ooh, ooh, because you could hardly miss it, you know. Here was this voice on the top going, King Midas in reverse. And he said, ooh, oh, ooh, that boy can do it. And so Cass, you know, knew him quite well, and I had met him before, so I invited him to come with us someplace, and whether it was Joni's or Cass's, the very first time that we sat down and sang a song, Stephen and I, he said, do that again. And we said, okay, and we did it again. He said, okay, now do it one more time. And the third time we did it, he put the third part on it all the way through perfect, and we went, you know, and we knew exactly what we wanted to do from that point on.
Obviously, part of the mystique of Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young is the reputations that each individual brought and the very distinct public personas of each. You come out of the Byrds, Nash comes out of the Hollies, Stills and Young come out of Buffalo, Springfield, and various other stops along the way. Is there some way to briefly describe what each brought to the mix and why that chemistry of such different and often warring factions worked the way it did?
It's difficult to characterize us, you know, in a thumbnail sketch, because we're, all four of us, each is a very complex guy. We are, as you say, very different human beings. We've managed to bridge that distance, you know, artistically, repeatedly. And in the case of Nash and myself, we became fast friends a long time ago, and we are, aside from my wife, Nash is my best friend in the world. We get along famously, and always have. You know, we live 100 yards from each other, our families hang out together. We are very, very close. We don't all of us agree, you know, about how to do things. For instance, Stephen and I butt heads constantly. But I love Stephen, and I have been through much too much with him not to care about the man a great deal and have respect for him. But I disagree with him all the time.
You wrote, I believe, that he, at least at one time, I don't know if you still think this, but he didn't give you and other band members the credit they deserved and used to view you guys as sort of his backup singers.
At his worst, yeah. He would treat us with immense disrespect. At his best, he's a great friend. That can vary wildly. Neil is another matter entirely. You know, Stephen, it's a simpler thing. We disagree about how to live our lives. We disagree about, you know, what approach we want to take to the kind of people we are. We disagree on very basic levels. But I think he's one of the best musicians and singer-songwriters in America, and I have made some of the best music of my life with him. You know, and I would never deny that. Neil is as strange as a snake's suspenders. He is he is a wonderful man. He's immensely bright and immensely courageous. He has triumphed over incredible difficulty personally in his life and incredible adversity, and done so with a grace and a courage that I can only be in awe of, okay? And I'm not really trying to overstate the case here. If anything, I'm understating it. He's a tremendously prolific artist. He writes so many songs that he pisses me off. I'm frankly jealous of him.
How do you react to the negative critical assessments, which are by no means the consensus? But I was surprised. Before you came on, I went back and I picked up the Rolling Stone record guide where they have reviews of thousands of albums. And apparently some of the people who reviewed records for Rolling Stone at that time viewed Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young as, I think one term I heard was bubblegum for adults. Slick,
They have done
soulless.
that repeatedly. They called my first solo album mediocre, you know, and mindless. They have apparently never liked us and always sort of had it in for us. And frankly, we don't really give a damn. You have to very early on in your career, if you want to stay sane, realize that a reviewer or a person that writes about you is one person. That's one ticket, one record. That's the way I look at it. They only bought one record. I can't get too excited about them. The people that are the public obviously did think that we had something to say and that we were saying it well, because they reacted to us like crazy. And we have had a career of a longevity, you know, that could only be explained by, you know, there being some quality in what we did. If we were as surface and, you know, and shallow as some of them wrote us up to be, we wouldn't be here still. You know, we would be gone with Alice Cooper's Snake. You know, I mean, we are still here, you know, and we're still filling, you know, auditoriums, and we are still selling records, and that there is only one way you can do that, and that is by writing music that touches somebody.
A couple of things here. If you're wondering, David had a motorcycle accident, and a serious one, which really banged up his left side, but he'll be back dancing before very long, so that's why it's one shoe off and,
Yes,
and one shoe
my
on.
left foot really isn't that big, honest.
Boy, what a relief that is. And he'll be back tomorrow with another installment, so what we don't cover here we'll try and get to tomorrow, including some of the personal history. Am I correct in saying that only like the second or third gig that CSNN ever played was Woodstock?
Second.
Second one.
Yep.
And
First
there you
time
are.
was Chicago Auditorium Theater, and the second one was Woodstock.
How intimidated were you?
What really made us nervous was that, as you say, our heroes were standing right around behind us, the band in particular, whom we were just in awe of. And you know, Airplane and Dead and Janis and Jimmy and Sly and everybody that we thought was good. And they were all kind of going, okay, let's see it. Record was good. Let's see it. Can you do it? Come on. You know, and there was no malice, but it was like, okay, let's see it. You know, and we were going, when when, you know, somebody like Robbie Robertson or Jimi Hendrix or, you know, Grace Slick or somebody comes up to you and says, man, that was so good. You know, you go, you know, it felt wonderful.
Joni Mitchell takes a pass to appear on the Dick Cavett show. She's not at Woodstock.
All true.
Then you help her write the song.
No, she wrote it. She wrote it, and she wrote it with such accuracy and with such insight that you can only just put it, you can only credit it to the genius that she has as a songwriter, because she wasn't there. But she talked to all of us when we came back the next night, and she just caught it. She caught the essence of it. Didn't matter whether she was there or not, she nailed it.
So the sense in which you helped her is not helping to compose it, but just to background her properly.
We came back bubbling. I mean, you understand, it was a very strange circumstance. There you have 500,000 people. There were no robberies, no rapes, no murders, no fights, no big fights that I know of. That's impossible. Ask any law enforcement officer. Doesn't happen. Even at a religious gathering, doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen. You know, it was a great thing. It can't be duplicated, obviously. If you look at Altamont, it can't be duplicated at all. But
you were there too, right?
Yeah, yeah. Altamont was a nightmare. It was the exact 180 degrees out antithesis of Woodstock.
Why?
Vibe. It's just a totally different vibe. You know, different people.
Even before the beatings took place and the guy was killed, and I think Marty Balin got knocked out on stage by one of the Hells. Even before those incidents, could you tell it was different?
Marty got into an argument with the Hells Angel. That's like saying, oh, please, sir, would you knock me out? The same thing goes for the rest of it. I was the only person who stuck up for the Hells Angels, because I feel that if you don't want the tiger to eat your lunch guests, you don't invite the tiger to lunch. They were asked to do security. That's like saying, would you please come over here and hit some people?
But a guy got beaten to death with a pool cue, didn't he?
Well, now he had a gun. You know, I think he might have gotten knifed. I'm not sure how it happened, but they were at that time extremely violent people, and they were asked to do what they thought was a violent job. I never did get a joyous feeling there, ever. There was always tension in the air from the moment it started.
There's an unbelievable story about you going to a party where Janis Joplin got into it with Jim Morrison. And the part about the story, now that's interesting enough, but the part about the story that knocked me over was the party took place at John Davidson's house. I mean, couldn't you find directions to Bert Convey's house? I mean, this is the most incongruous thing I've ever heard of. You guys and Janis Joplin and Jim Morrison.
I can't explain it. I know I was there. I know that's whose house it was. I know what happened, but why? You gotta. I'm not guilty, Your Honor. I didn't plan it.
What happened?
I don't have enough imagination to have planned something that bizarre.
What happened?
Okay. Well, now we have. This is going to be a little controversial. I never liked Jim Morrison at all, and I never liked the Doors. I didn't like them as a band. I didn't like their music. I personally did not like Jim Morrison. I didn't like the way he behaved or how he came across. I thought he was an obnoxious person. But he used to get into it with people when he would get drunk. And now, folks, you got to understand that a tremendous number of people, way more people than me, think he was a genius and very talented, and at least could credit him as being a very fine poet. I didn't, but I'm in the minority. He got into it with Janis. He used to get into it with people when he was drunk, and he got into it with Janis when it was the wrong person. Janis was, to say it politely, not shy.
Yeah.
And she belted him with a bottle of Southern Comfort and knocked him cold. Absolutely cold. Right on the floor.
Did the party continue apace, or they just shoved them aside?
Right on. Just went right on. Everybody was thrilled. Nice, good party. We like it.
I'm just trying to imagine John Davidson walking back in.
I'm not sure John was even there.
I'll take Janis Joplin to block, John. It just doesn't make it.
Yeah, I'm sure there were confrontations and combinations that were even more bizarre than that, man, that took place, but that was certainly one.
As promised, David Crosby is back tomorrow night. Now, this is the paperback version of his book, Long Time Gone, which has just come out. On January 16th, he went into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as a member of the Byrds, and we'll continue talking about Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young, and some of the personal ups and downs if you join us again here tomorrow night. Until then, see you later.
Tonight on Dave's Show, a rare television appearance by Carly Simon. And Bebe Neuwirth takes a break from Cheers.
You know, your family will want to watch this one together.
Later continues with the life and times of David Crosby.
How you feel now, rock star? I stopped the drugs, the creativity came back. I mean, what else can I say?
Tonight.
Thanks for staying up later. We're back now with part 2 of our conversation with David Crosby. Of course, of Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young, and earlier from the Byrds. When a band reaches tremendous heights of creative excellence and public acceptance, like your band did, does it ultimately always unravel and go downhill, or could you say, if we had done this differently, that differently, we could have done the same sort of thing at that level of quality for 5, 6 more years?
There is an inherent instability. Witness the fact that there are only about 3 or 4 bands that can still play with the original people in them. The Grateful Dead, the Rolling Stones, and Crosby, Stills, and Nash. I don't think there are hardly any others. Performers have egos, large ones, or they would not get out there and go, "Hi, look at me." So that naturally they're in conflict with each other. The egos of the performers are in conflict with each other. Each guy is in competition with the others.
I'm not going to cop out an inch to fear. And you walked out 2 days in a row, you hypocrite. You piss me off.
We used to, blow apart regularly, on a regular basis. And I wouldn't try to lay the blame at anybody's door. None of us are saints. I think we were lucky to get the music that we did made.
How much did your eventual collapse from drug use have to do with it?
A great deal. I think I was largely, or at least to a large degree, responsible for the breakup of the band. Because I made myself really almost incapacitated. I wasn't just smoking a joint, I was doing heroin and cocaine, and I was freebasing the cocaine, which is even more obsessive an addiction than the heroin is. And I pretty much, towards the end, was not a functional human being. I was as bad off as you can be and not die. And I think that...
Should you be dead, you think?
Oh, yeah,
By
several
all rights?
times over, sure. Overdoses on heroin, gunfights, seizures, seizures while driving.
Literal gunfights?
Yeah.
OK Corral stuff?
No, I shot first. The other guy didn't have much chance, but the better living through chemistry, that's the life you lead when you are deeply involved with drugs.
There are several incidents where other musicians put themselves on the line, in effect, trying to push you out of the way of the moving train. Graham Nash has written at least a couple of songs about it.
Yep.
Wasted on the Way is about the group in general, but the focal point is your drug use and missed opportunities for friendship and creative excellence. And then there's a song called Into the Darkness that has a passage I'm going to read. I'm not going to trust it to memory. Your demons are dying to drag you away into the darkness.
Yeah, that was the most direct one. He dealt with it a little bit in another song called Glass and Steel, but that was the most direct one, Into the Darkness. And he was, you got to understand, he did that out of love. Neil wrote some stuff to me too, and as I said, all of these people who loved me at one time or another stood in front of me and said, David, you're killing yourself. You're not the guy you used to be. You are a nearly dead person, and I can't stand to watch it.
It got to a point, though, where several came over to your house, and they thought they were reaching you, and you're going into a...
Several doesn't describe it. I came home, and there was about 25 of my best friends there.
Who was there?
Oh, a lot of these same people I mentioned. Graham, Paul Kantner, Grace Slick, Jackson Brown, the guy that co-wrote my book with me, Carl Gottlieb, who's a longtime friend, Joel Bernstein, Nancy Brown, an enormous number of close friends.
And they thought they were getting to you, and then you snuck off and did some drugs anyway, right?
Got loaded again, yeah. I can only tell you that I was a truly, amazingly, you know, addicted person, and completely in denial about it. You know, I would say all the standard denial lines. I don't tell you how to run your life. Don't tell me how to run mine. If I want to go to hell in a handbasket, it's my life. I can do it. Well, my case is different. I can handle it. No, I'm not really as bad as that guy over there. These are all standard lines. If you read, you know, any of the literature involved in 12-step recovery programs, you know, you'll find all of this stuff just written down word for word. You know.
Wasn't there an incident in Philadelphia where you apparently were so wasted you had to leave the stage in the middle of
sick,
of the
actually, is what I was. I was so sick because I couldn't get the drugs that I wanted, in this case heroin, that I thought I was going to fall down on stage. I was so dizzy and so, you know, having had such bad stomach cramps and stuff, that I wandered off stage, went back, and kind of like just lay down on the couch, and I was almost unconscious. And Stephen came back and like poured a bottle of water on me and said, "Come on, man, you can't do this."
So these guys were still playing. You left in the middle of a performance, right?
These guys are still playing. Bad. Yeah. I'm not, you know, I make no bones about it. It got really bad. That's why I'm so glad it's how it is now, you know.
What would you say to your own kids or to people who admire your music? Because it isn't as simple as saying, good people don't do this. Because by all accounts, you're a good person, and you did some of the stupidest, self-destructive, uncaring to the people who loved you and stood by you stuff, yet you came out at the other end whole. And so it's a snappy thing like just don't do it. That doesn't
get
work. It doesn't ring true.
No, you can't just come in and say, just say no, and everything will be hunky-dory. You know, that doesn't get it. And you can't... I don't know how to explain it, you know, better than you... What I tell kids, what I told my own kid, and what I tell other kids, I go and talk to kids a lot about it. I tell them the truth about what happened to me. I tell them how innocuous and how innocent it seemed at the onset, which is one of the most, you know, insidious things about it. And I tell them how the progression of it goes. You know, that it starts off, it looks like a nice windy little road through the woods, you know, and you can't see the end of the road where it goes over the cliff. And it definitely does go over the cliff.
Was the public humiliation, and that's really the only way to put it, when it reached its lowest point and you're spending Christmas of '85 in jail and you're doing nearly a year behind bars and there are pictures on every newscast and in every newspaper of you being led away, did it have to come to that before you could emerge maybe more whole now, it appears, than when you first went in?
I'm afraid so. I had tried going into hospitals repeatedly and failed. Sometimes I'd last one night, as in the case of the intervention. Sometimes I would last, you know, as much as 3 or 4 weeks, which I did at Fair Oaks down here in New Jersey, and then I escaped, and it's a locked facility. Right, Dave. And I think I was so severely addicted that I had to be forcibly separated from the possibility of getting drugs for long enough to wake up, which takes, in the case of somebody as severely addicted as I was, you know, at least 6 months, you know, more like a year. And that's what happened. When I got locked up, which is certainly, I don't recommend it as the way to do it. If you have a choice, go into treatment, because when they do it in a Texas prison, it's like, their idea of treatment is, well, you got yourself this way. Let's see you get out of it, boy. How you feel now, rock star? And it was a very tough way to do it, but at the same time, you know, it worked. By the time I got out of jail, I had written about 14 sets of lyrics and managed to get a hold of a guitar a couple of times in the band room and turn them into songs at least 2 or 3 times. I had written 3 screenplay ideas, By the time I was out, you know, a year, I had written that book with Carl and made an album of my own. By the time I was out a year and a half or 2 years, I had done a Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young album and an album of my own. And I can only draw one conclusion from that, you know. I stopped the drugs, the creativity came back. I mean, what else can I say? You know, there it is.
Is what was written in various places true about CSNY at their height? The greater the fights, the better the music that came out of it immediately
very often.
Afterwards?
It wasn't always like that. Sometimes it could be very detrimental, but there were times when we would be... I can remember a time in Philadelphia at the Spectrum where Stills and I were ready to go off on each other big time. I wanted to punch him right through into the next universe, and we went on and did one of the best shows we've ever done. What's it like then on stage? Where does the energy go when you really want to deck somebody and all that baggage is out there? It gets transmuted. I don't know how that happens, but it does. You get out there and you've got all this adrenaline pumping, and suddenly you are playing and you do something good and you look over and you, instead of being angry at each other, you smile at each other because you know you just did it great, and it just goes whoosh, boom, right over the top like a wave breaking, and it's a wonderful feeling. Is that a salve on the wound afterwards? Does it make it all right? Sure, or when you get off stage, do you say, all right, now I'm still pissed at you? No, you come off saying, man, I'm really sorry I got in your face. The musicality of Crosby, Stills, and Nash, I'm going to say CSNY. That way we'll get Neil in where he belongs, or where he doesn't, we'll just mix it all in. The musicality combined with some kind of social conscience made, you know, songs like Ohio and Woodstock and Chicago. Deja Vu and Teach Your Children. Those were anthems of the late 60s and the early 70s. How nostalgic for that time do you get? Not very. The things I liked about it, you know, wouldn't be impossible to achieve now. I liked it that because, you know, the issues were so clear-cut. I mean, you looked at Nixon and you knew what was wrong. Because the issues were so clear-cut at that point, the society was very polarized, and people were willing to stand up and be counted. Well, I like that. I think that's a healthy, you know, infusion of strength into the democratic process. That makes people get out and vote. That makes people get out and stand up and be counted. And I think that's what makes this country work. What was it like the day that Neil Young composed Ohio? It was very intense. Neil is very intense. Somebody came back to this house that he and I were at for the afternoon, and we were sitting outside on a porch in the sun playing a little guitar, and they brought back Life magazine, which had that picture in it of the girl kneeling over the kid dead on the concrete, and with that expression on her face of, what? Why? You know, how could you do this? And I opened it to that, and I looked at it, and it shocked me, and I handed it to Neil, and it shocked him, and we just looked at it for a while, and then I don't know whether I handed him the guitar or he picked it up, but he picked up the guitar and he started playing, and he started writing, and he wrote a very simple song, and at the end of it I started adding to it something, but it was powerful, and I got on the phone right away to Graham and said, we're coming to LA, book the studio. We've got to record this now. A couple of loose threads here before we wrap up. I bring this up only because all parties concerned seem to be perfectly happy talking about it. Joni Mitchell was involved with both Graham Nash and yourself, and all three of you wrote songs about it. She wrote Willie, he wrote Our House, you wrote Guinevere. All about the same thing. And obviously you're all very good friends. Usually these things, I feel safe in saying, don't work out quite that way. No, they don't. I credit it to all of us, you know, really caring about each other. We all loved each other, you know, very much, and these were not really very possessive relationships. When I went with Joan, I loved her a lot, and it was a wonderful time, you know, but I didn't expect to stay there, and neither did she. And when she went to Graham, my feeling was, how could I, how could I be unhappy about two people that I really loved being together and being happy? I couldn't see anything wrong with that. And because I didn't feel I owned her in the first place. And we avoided most of the pitfalls there. It was very fortunate.
Interesting background about your father that I'm sure most people aren't aware of. He won the first Oscar for cinematography. He was the cinematographer on a movie in the early 30s called Taboo, which
was it the first one or one of the first ones?
I was told the first, but among the first. I never saw that movie, but all of us have seen High Noon, and he was the cinematographer on High Noon. So there's a show business background there.
Yeah.
That doesn't necessarily mean he appreciated what you did.
He did and he didn't. He thought it was too loud. But he thought it was nice, that I was at least doing something with my life. It's funny you should bring it up, actually, because they have just recently decided they found a good print of Taboo, the movie that he got the Academy Award for, and they're going to re-release it in art theaters and on a videotape, because it is such a classic film. It's one of the finest examples of early cinematography and one of the finest examples of early filmmaking.
Then he was blacklisted on some flimsy grounds during the McCarthy era, and he didn't even realize it, except he couldn't get work. Didn't realize it, as I understand the story, until they tried to hire him on From Here to Eternity, and somebody said, don't touch this guy.
They wouldn't let him be first camera. They would only let him be second unit. And it's weird. At that point during the McCarthy era, if you weren't a little bit to the right of Attila the Hun, you were, a pinko. And my father, I don't think ever was anything more than a liberal Democrat, but he did get, tarred with the same brush and had a long time of it being very difficult for him to get good work.
What are some of the projects you're working on now?
I've sung a lot on other people's records. Obviously we also, Crosby, Stills, and Nash just did a big push on our record, Live It Up, which did well. And we did a long tour, 72 dates. That went well, and we were very, very happy about it. I have done this box set, with the Byrds, which I think is a milestone. I'm really proud of it. And fortunately for us, it's doing very well. I've also sung with other people quite a bit. I sang on Bonnie Raitt's Nick of Time album. I sang on Bob Dylan's new record. I sang 2 songs on Phil Collins' But Seriously album. And he's a wonderful guy and one of the least affected musicians that I know by stardom. He's as big as you can get, and he just is as real as you can be. And that's been a great deal of fun. I've been trying to write more. I love to write screenplays, and so I've been working on that some. Since I've been in a wheelchair for the last month and a half, I've started to write a screenplay about a kid in a wheelchair. It's taught me an awful lot. I know that I certainly am going to want to do more work for, the paralyzed vets and stuff, because I now understand what it's like to, if you want something that's 3 feet away from you, you have to get into a chair and get over there to get it, or ask somebody to help you to get it. It's really a lesson.
We really appreciate David Crosby, under somewhat adverse circumstances, still recovering from the motorcycle accident, spending 2 nights here with us. On January 16th, when he went into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as a member of the Byrds, Don Henley gave the induction speech, but in doing some research, it could have been Jerry Garcia from the Grateful Dead. I don't know if you've heard this, but this is what he said about you. He said, David Crosby has never gotten the credit he deserves as a musician. He's an uncanny singer with as much vocal control as anybody I've ever seen or worked with. Pretty high praise.
Jerry, thanks.
We're glad you're back, literally and figuratively.
Thanks, man.
Thanks for spending the time with us.
It's been a pleasure.
We got to go. See you later.
Still be the man you fell in love with.
Late Night's back, and they're cooking up quite a show with Carol Burnett, Warren Zevon, and straight from the Bayou, Chef Paul Prudhomme. Oh, you can just taste it tonight. Stay up later for part 1 of this most enlightening interview with CSNY's Stephen Stills.
We were as bad as the Rolling Stones. I mean, we were a dangerous band.
Tonight.
Thanks for staying up later. We've had Graham Nash. We've had David Crosby. Can Neil Young be far behind? Because now we've got the hat trick. Here is Stephen Stills. This is his latest, Stills Alone, which we'll talk about in just a bit. This is a big week, though, because as we tape this, the CSN box set comes out. Now, this is a 4-album or 4-disc set, and I feel like Ed McMahon to Karnak. Everything you could possibly want about CSN is here. I mean, every great song that Crosby, Stills, and Nash ever did.
It's true, though. There are 77 songs, I believe.
And they're all on there. I mean, this is not one of those deals where, like, you buy it and you only get 4 of your favorite songs. I mean, they're all there. Sweet Judy Blue Eyes and Marrakesh Express and Deja Vu, and they're all there.
There are 24 songs that, versions of songs and even new songs that haven't been heard before. I mean, we found alternate takes of, an alternate mix of the suite, because we had taken out the drums, and the drums are just barely there. I mean, it's just, well, David and I looked at the stack of tapes, which would fill this particular area, and went, Graham, you're so good at this. And he went to Hawaii, I went to Mexico, and Graham listened to all this stuff. God bless him, he's got the patience for that. I can't quite do that, but, and we found these gems. He kept every week, every few days, it was, Stephen, you've got to come down and listen to this.
It kind of brings me to something I think is interesting about, and it's so hard to keep track. People honestly don't know, even people that are fans of the group or groups, they don't know for sure which one is a Crosby, Stills, and Nash song, which one's a Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young song, and they confuse Buffalo, Springfield, and there are components of each. There's all kinds of...
I kind of like that.
There's all kinds of overlap, and the point I'm getting to is this stuff was successful, at least for a concentrated period of time, successful with very, very different types of talents and types of attitudes coming together.
The variety, just like America, the variety in that stew is what makes it really interesting, you know. Saucier makes things out of varying elements, you know. And I actually wanted to have, loved having, you know, a Confederate flag and a Canadian flag and a British flag and an American flag, you know. Kind of, you know, because it's all these divergent influences with us. And it just, it's the same stew that this country is.
Let me ask you to give a scouting report on each of the 4 components, strengths and weaknesses. David Crosby.
David Crosby is one of the most generous, intelligent, and absolutely one of the funniest people alive. And he has wisdom and grace and style that's just amazing, and great dignity as well. And what he has done with his life and the message that he's bringing to people is, first of all, imperative, and second of all, paid for at great cost, you know, and very heroic.
How about musically?
He's the honey. He's the honey between the razors and the gravel. And he's the glue that holds it together.
How about Graham Nash?
Graham Nash has a rapier intellect and possessed of great vision, compassion. He's guileless. For a Machiavellian SOB. But no, he's guileless and just wants the best for everyone. He's got patience, and he hears everything. He's like the elephant's memory. And he's got a marvelous voice, and he writes those wonderfully accessible songs that everybody can relate to and say, oh, I felt that. I'm not so alone.
Neil Young.
Neil Young is a genius. He's an enigma. Never played a team sport in his life. That's why he keeps, you know, he doesn't know what that is. That's why he keeps going and, you know, and no, I have to go make a solo album and stuff. So making that kind of a commitment is just not in his universe. He's got too much else to do and too many other roles to fill. He's also one of my best friends. I mean, I could always talk to him about anything.
Did you need him then to take the band to its best work? Because if Crosby and Nash tend more toward the sweet, didn't you need a dash of the bitter?
What Neil brings to us, I think we bring the best out of each other. He's not quite so bitter, you know, not quite so tart.
When he's with you guys?
When he's with us. And I think it serves him well. He's so much fun to work with, and he's so fast. And a lot of the devices as far as record making go, Neil and I invented during the Springfield. I mean, we just sit there and, well, what's that box do? Well, what does it do when you do that, you know? And
I heard you say one time, or maybe I read it, that Buffalo Springfield, as successful as they were, has never really been heard on record the way they really sounded.
Oh, yeah, we were as bad as the Rolling Stones. I mean, we were a dangerous band, a dangerously cooking band. We never, that's why we learned to become engineers, Neil and I, because we were searching. We didn't finish until after the Springfield long since broke up, but we never got to where we could get them to sound. We didn't discover any of the tricks that, to make them sound like Motown records. If we could have gotten the rhythm section to sound like a Motown rhythm section, just the sound, those guys would certainly play like that, then that would have framed the whole thing, and it would have sounded more like we did live.
Why wasn't there a concert album made then? I mean, at least you could have, if it was that raw and had that much of an edge, even if it was imperfect, we could hear it in a concert album to some extent, right?
Well, for all of the noise that Buffalo Springfield made at the time that we were together, we didn't sell that many records, you know. I don't know what it was. It was just there was not a big mass appeal. It was very, it was on its way. It was about to break when I think we were on the way to New York to do the Carson show when Neil decided to do something else. And it was about to pop and actually make enough money. But you have to be semi-successful to get somebody to go ahead and send the truck.
As I understand it, you were going to be on the Carson show. This would have been around 1966 or 67 when it was still in New York. And wasn't Otis Redding going to be on the same night? I mean, this would have been a hell of a Tonight Show. And Neil Young bolted at almost literally the last minute.
Literally the 11th hour.
Why?
I have no idea. You have to ask him.
How angry were you?
I was more hurt than angry. You know, I understood, you know, because he saw himself walking into the group trap, and I think that the idea became so offensive to him that he bolted.
I asked you about everybody except yourself. What do you think you brought as strengths and weaknesses to all these various combinations?
I had the car. I'll tell you something. One thing about my whole job that makes me the most uncomfortable is this whole fame business and this whole talking about yourself and everything. Right. There's something about it that's vaguely indecent to me. So I have a hard time with that question. I can talk about the other guys and rave about them and give you all this stuff, but as far as, it's not that I haven't got the sense to look inside myself. It's just I don't want to, those are not my definitions to make. I know I've got a real good sense of black history and black music, and all my roots are in the South, and growing up with, you know, with music sung on back porches and in churches down the road from the place where my father was trying to build this development in the middle of Florida. And the lady who was married to the head plumber of the whole place that was doing all the plumbing on these houses, she had this guitar stuck in this beautiful Gibson J200 stuck in her closet, and wrote country songs and sent them into A-Cuff Rose. And she was incredible. I mean, just incredible. A flat picker of like Lester Flat, you know, I mean, just, you know. And so I've got all of those wonderful influences that weren't available to, that were different. They were so pure and natural that they were, I mean, they're the real thing. Like Eric Clapton was talking about when he talks about Jimmy. And, you know, he says, I was sort of second hand.
Jimi Hendrix.
Yeah, because he said I was sort of second hand, and Jimmy was like the real thing, and I was in awe of him, you know. I was right next to the real thing too. I was a white kid living in the middle of the South, way out in the country, and there was this incredible music floating out of these orange groves. You know. So I guess I bring that sense of earth.
You mentioned Jimi Hendrix. It's hard to overstate how important this guy is in your life, right?
Really, it is. He was a natural like I am. He grew up learning music the way I did, and we looked at each other and saw each other play once and went, oh. And he just looked at me and said, oh, you just haven't done this enough. Here's how that works. You can do this. And I said, Jimmy, I don't have a thumb that's 6 inches long. I cannot rock my... So we have to think of another way for me to do that. And he said, oh, right. And so, and he would, you know, and it was sort of like looking in a mirror because he was South, you know. And it just, he had this strength that, I mean, he knew I had it in me, but it just, you know, I hadn't worked out enough, is the way he looked at it. And he'd show me all kinds of positions and stuff. But he was like Satchel Paige, throwing a fastball.
In addition to his artistry and his passion and whatever
with
spirit
this incredible
was brought out,
physical talent.
Yeah, actual anatomy was a big part of it. He had hands that no one else had.
He had hands about that big, about that long, and a thumb that could wrap very easily all the way around, you know, without having to do like that, like most of it. He could wrap from there to there around a guitar neck. I'll show you what I mean. I mean, it's like anybody doing that, you know, that's about how far. His thumb would reach all the way to there. And I mean, he had the strength. The only person I've seen like that is Stevie Ray Vaughan. He had that same power, and Stevie Ray used these cables. He used these huge medium gauge strings, which is like, ow. And he's pulling them 4 and 5 frets.
Hendrix and Johnny Winter had a guitar duel someplace, some basement club or something.
Yeah, Jimmy thought it was so stupid. He thought it was really silly. He kind of went down there because everybody insisted on it. But he thought the whole idea of guitar duels was really dumb.
But you were there, right?
I played bass.
And all three of you were smashed or not? Or?
Well, I was playing in the wrong key. And it's really hard when you have your hand right on the wrong side of that little silver thing. And Jimmy kicked me in the butt. And he went, oh.
What do you suppose, if Jimi Hendrix were around today, what do you suppose he would have evolved into? Or could he have just played that supersonic guitar forever and there would have been an audience?
We'll never know. I think he was going to go back and do some simple, you know, and he and Buddy Guy would have made a great, he and Buddy Guy would have made some record together or something like that. Buddy Guy's the greatest living guitar player as far as I know.
Did anybody see,
Eric,
at the time that some people bit the dust, Morrison, Joplin, Hendrix, did anybody see clearly what was going on? Or was everybody involved to one extent or another to the point where nobody could advise anybody else and say, hey, wait a minute, come on, for your own good?
I can't recall how I tried, but I did try with Jimmy a little bit, but it just... You know, I'm as guilty as the next guy. I didn't say nothing. You know, I would catch myself and go up too far. And I didn't say nothing. And I must say that I don't feel good about that.
So
I didn't say enough.
Was there a little bit of a glass houses kind of thing that affected not just you, but everybody?
Yeah, sure, of course there would.
Back after this. Couldn't you have been a member of the Lovin' Spoonful?
Oh, I wanted to be, desperately. I was here in New York, living in a hovel in the Lower East Side. And I was watching this group get put together, and nobody knew that I played electric guitar and bass and drums and all kinds of things. I wanted to be the bass player for this band so bad. Couldn't get the time of day. Because I was just a kid wandering around the village passing the hat like everybody else, right? And couldn't get the time of day. So, that, you know, and then watching it happen and then listening to them, I said, I've got to get to California and start something.
And so you went off on your own, or?
Yeah, I took a job with this folk group and did this little circuit up through Canada. in Thunder Bay, in Fort William, Ontario, now known as Thunder Bay. This guy in a hearse rolls up to do a guest spot, and it's the local hero Neil Young from Winnipeg and his band, and they were great. They were doing just what I knew would work, at doing folk songs with an electric guitar, particularly a Gretsch electric guitar.
Now here comes the real shocker. There was a chance, I don't know how great a chance, but at least you were talked about as a possible member of the Monkees?
Well, that's not so much a shock when you hear my end of the story. I heard this open call go out around L.A. And you didn't have to be a genius to figure out what happens to people that go on TV to do this stuff, and not in the 60s, right? But I figured, what a great way to get a great deal and write a bunch of songs and make a bunch of money. I wanted to write the song. So I went down there and basically, just sort of shut up and answered the questions, waiting for my opportunity to say, well, actually, I'd just as soon write the songs. I asked that question. It turns out they had a deal all made with a publishing company and had all their writers lined up. So I kind of, well, after all that doesn't happen, they didn't want me anyway.
What do you think would have happened?
And so I said, I got a friend, by the way, though, that you might like to see, and that was Peter Tork.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And he obviously did become one of the Monkees. What do you think would have happened to you and your career had you been one of them?
I can assure you I would not have done it.
No way.
I was there to be a songwriter. I went down and played the game, and I would have wormed my way out of it, because it just would have put me in a stereotypical kind of position, and that just wasn't me.
How close did you come to becoming the lead singer of Blood, Sweat, and Tears?
Not very close. Jimmy Fielder, who was playing bass for them, called me and said, would you like to think about this gig? And I was in the middle of something else. And I said, yeah, I've got to finish this, though. I'm committed to finish this, or something like that. And then by the time I got available to even go work out with them, they'd done something else. I don't know how that would have worked.
I'm not exactly sure where we left off, but we'll pick it up someplace with Stephen Stills tomorrow night. Hope to see you then. See you later.
Tonight on Late Night, Dave just can't wait to get things started with Mary Lou Henner, holiday expert Martha Stewart, and World Series MVP Jack Morris. All tonight. Later, if you think you heard everything on part 1 with Stephen Stills.
I got a big surprise for you, and it was a big surprise for us.
Tonight.
Thanks for staying up later. This is night 2 with Stephen Stills, and starting just wherever it occurs to me, because I'm not sure what our agenda here is in this hour. You watched the shows when Graham Nash was here and when David Crosby was here.
I didn't see the Graham show. I saw part of it.
Well, you saw the Crosby shows, and he said something like, at his best, Stephen Stills is a tremendous friend, great musician. We had great moments together. At his worst, he put us kind of in the background, called us his background singers, and his ego got too large. How did that make you feel when you heard him say it?
Well, at first I went, that's not true. And then I sort of, actually back when I was accused of it originally, I wasn't aware that I was doing that, but then when I think about it, I probably was. I didn't mean to, and it was just, it's that part of that first flush of success, it just comes with it.
I'm not gonna cop out an inch to fear. And you walked out 2 days in a row, you hypocrite. You pissed me off.
I mean, you're 24 years old and they give you all the money you need and tell you that everything that you do is absolutely fantastic and want to know what you think about everything. And, it's not a question of if you lose your poise, it's how quickly you get it back, And I said some things, I'm sure, and behaved in a fashion that seemed to, that were probably quite hurtful. And was unable to sufficiently apologize, even to date. You know, I kind of want to do one of those, like in that wonderful film with the fish called Wanda, where he's hanging upside down. I am utterly and completely sorry. Profoundly so. But I mean, you know, it was just, you know, that was my way of behaving stupidly with the first flush of success.
If I asked you to pick one or maybe two songs from each of these combinations that you think pretty much exemplifies the best work they did, what would you pick from Buffalo Springfield?
Boy, is this a quiz?
It's a quiz where there's no wrong answers, though.
Test. I think Mr. Soul was one of the better Buffalo Springfield songs. Sit Down, I Think I Love You was a real good Buffalo Springfield song. You know, like I said, our performances of the Springfield didn't quite get to record, but boy, you know, everything was just a little up, you know, because we're in the studio, you know, kind of.
Yeah, and you said last night that you really thought the really down performances that had the edge and captured what the band was about, those aren't on record
never even
anywhere.
got close to the studio. Yeah.
See, now, if someone who was a fan had to pick one, they'd probably pick For What It's Worth, because that's the one that kind of captured the time, it seemed.
Mm-hmm. And actually, that was a real good performance, too. Yeah, it was pretty good. Although I sang it very weird, and I've seldom done it that way since. So I was very tenuous about it because I'd just written it the night before. If I had it in mind for the previous few days before I wrote that song, it was back there to write a song for the guys on the line who, you know, didn't know why they were there, were trying to deal with it.
In Vietnam.
In Vietnam, right. And then I drove by this, you know, this police-caused riot, and, you know, it all came together. So that song is about both. And I'm not sure that For What It's Worth it still doesn't apply today.
Now, if I asked you to pick a couple from Crosby, Stills, and Nash, minus Young, what would you pick?
The Sweet.
Sweet Judy Blue Eyes?
Yours and Mine. David's song off this new album, which is absolutely one of the most brilliant things he ever wrote. And Teach Your Children.
And how about CSNY?
Carry On. Down by the River, Deja Vu.
Let me hit you with something that I sort of ran by David Crosby when he was here. I went back in the research and saw a couple of things from Rolling Stone. Now, in one article, they said CSN was close to a Beatles-like phenomenon from an American group in the late 60s, early 70s. Now, some people might say overstatement, but certainly that was a flattering thing. Then there were reviews of CSN, or in some cases with Neil Young, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, and the general tone of those reviews were kind of bubblegum for slightly older people, not enough oomph, overrated.
Ah, yes. Well, the term journalistic claptrap comes to mind. Sometimes I wonder what show they went to, or did they just stay home and listen to the records and decide that, and a lot of it was affected by who they saw last week and who's their current fave, and particularly back in those times, the Rolling Stone reviewers were very, very trendy, you know, and I mean, Ralph Gleason would be rolling in his grave with some of these guys, and I have Ralph Gleason to thank for my career. I mean, he wrote a piece in the San Francisco Chronicle one time that was like the first guy that understood what I was trying to do. And it thrilled me to death. But I don't know, it's so easy to write a bad review. If you're a writer, you got to know this. If you're a writer, you can sit down and write a scorcher, and it's so much fun because there's all these great phrases like, you know, dated, and just, you know, writing a put-down. It's just such a piece of cake. Writing an actual thought review about something that was thought-provoking, you know, was a little like work. So I don't tend to read reviews or take them seriously.
Your best stuff, when I say you, I mean whatever combinations, CSNY or just Crosby, Stills, and Nash, or Buffalo Springfield's best stuff, it was accessible. And sometimes, I'm not trying to make a blanket statement, sometimes the more accessible and commercially successful something is, the more critics tend to sneer at it.
Well, of course, you know. It's true so much of the time that it's kind of, you can almost depend on it. You know, they do the same thing with McCartney. They do the same thing with a lot of people that are just marvelous, you know, great musicians and great art, and you know, and they just go, oh, that, right. Like I said, it's easy to write.
Suppose somebody wrote a song and recorded a song like Marrakesh Express right now. My question is this: would there be an audience for it besides your old audience, and would there be a radio station that would give it the kind of play that it needs, or would it just get lost?
I got a big surprise for you, and it was a big surprise for us. When we play that song, we never played that song for 20 years, right? Because we always thought, now that's just bubblegum, right? And Nash just kind of, oh, it's just bubblegum. The first time we did that song on stage, we did it in Australia, and they went nuts. And then we, okay, well, that's an older crowd. We went to the next place, it's all kids. They went nuts. We went to Japan, it's all kids. They went nuts. I'm bored. You know? I'm sorry, it's one of those classics, and you can't get away from it. It may not mean anything, but it's just a neat song that everybody remembers, and it would get played, and it would be hit today.
The second gig that you guys ever played together was Woodstock, right? There had been a stop in Chicago, then you go to Woodstock. This is what's known as stepping right up to the big time, whether you realize it at that point or not.
Well, everybody got very nervous because everyone that we liked was standing around the back of the stage, and it had a particular effect on David. I was just trying to get my guitar in tune, and that's virtually all I remember. It's like the temperature dropped about 10 degrees right before we went on. I had an acoustic guitar, got it in tune, and the guy sat it down, and I saw it sit there while I was on the other side of the stage because I was going to walk out and they were going to hand it to me, which was a dumb thing to do. They hand it to me, and it's spring, and so it's getting to the point where, you know, and trying not to, you know, and trying to, like, keep the groove. And that's all I remember, really, about that moment is amazing that I was able to get it.
You mentioned Sweet Judy Blue Eyes as one of the songs you'd kind of put in the time capsule. Is there anything to add to people's general understanding that it was written for Judy Collins? Is there some aspect to this that we don't know? Or?
No, and as a matter of fact, I've never again allowed the name of who the song was to be written about used because it gets to be too much, you know, the poor thing. She was so very gracious about it, though. Someone asked her if she understood that that was written for her, and she said, one could only hope, which was very, very nice of her to do, because those kinds of things can get annoying. No, actually, it's, no, that was written for her, and it just sort of, it evolved by way of basically an inspired moment where I said, I had these incompleted songs, and I said, wait, let's put them together and see how they fit, and all the transitions seemed to work, and then we went, oh, yeah.
You think rock and roll in general gets overanalyzed, critiqued down to the last minute detail, and all kinds of scholarly analyses of what this means and that means?
As opposed to real ongoing history, which gets trivialized.
Yeah, sometimes the overview is lost.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it just seems to me that the analysis of some of this stuff gets a little overdone, and really important events get trivialized.
Is it better in every case if the mystery then is maintained? In the case of Sweet Judy Blue Eyes, people know that it was originally written for Judy Collins. But is it best not to talk about it? Best just to let anybody interpret any song they want, any way they want?
Well, basically, that's what it's for. It's for, whatever it was about my life that motivated me to write these things. If you relate to it, there's something about your life that motivates you in a similar way. Otherwise, that's what creates the initial attraction.
When Graham Nash was here, I told him, and this is really the truth, I wasn't saying it to make him feel good. When I was at Syracuse University in the early 70s, you'd hear a lot of music. Some of it still has lasting resonance. Others was trendy garbage. But you'd hear a lot of music all the time. It was the life of almost every kid, 18, 19 years old, there. You could walk through the quad and you hear music blaring from every window. And you heard you guys about as often as anybody. This was 1970. 1971. And songs like Carry On and Ohio and Teach Your Children, whatever, from the Deja Vu album. And in that period of time, those songs were close to anthems for kids of that generation. Do you ever get kind of misty for that period of time, for the effect you had on people, for the fact that you were part of the soundtrack of their lives?
No, I miss being that thin. No, that's, I don't, you know, we were talking about, you know, their comments on my behavior at the time. And no, I don't want to go back there. Not even close. I enjoy my wisdom. Basically, right now, I'm discovering how wonderful it is to be a new father on this side of 40, you know. I have a 3-year-old daughter, and basically, she don't care. I don't care. You know, I care what she cares about, you know.
Yeah.
And my mom gave me the most wonderful compliment. She walked up and we were gooing around on the floor one night and, with my daughter, and she said, "How come you're so much better of a father than yours was?" And I said, "I don't know, Mother. Maybe I learned what not to do, because it sure is easy, you know."
What do you suppose you'll want your daughter to know about that time? What do you suppose? How do you suppose you'll communicate to her what her father and his compatriots were part of?
Sometimes I feel, after we've done one of these 3-day blitzkriegs of talking to everyone in the universe, that everything she could possibly want to know is a matter of record.
Yeah.
But what I want her to know is that's only part of the story. There's no way that they can get inside what that was all like. It was just too strange, and like the study of any history, if she really wants to know about it, she's going to have to look at the art and the military and the political and the agricultural and scientific history of the time and put it all together and then get a sense of what it was like then.
How much of that spirit of rock and roll, whatever you understood it to be, how much is still out there?
Oh man, listen to the rap stuff. I mean, you know, we might miss the sense of melody, but they're doing the same thing. They're talking to each other in a language that they understand because they got to, because nobody else will let them talk anywhere else. I mean, they're totally frustrated, and they, you know, it gets mystifying, you know, just like hip and groovy was to our moms and dads, you know. But I think it's some of it's brilliant, you know. Some of it's excessive, and some of it's annoying, and some of it's in bad taste, but a lot of it is just plain brilliant.
Do you miss the feeling of rock and roll as a unifying force? Now, I don't mean to say that everybody listened to rock and roll.
Rock and roll is ours. Rock and roll is ours. That's our universe. And hip hop is the newest. But hip hop is the same thing to them that rock and roll was to us. And I say more power to them.
Before we go here, what should people know besides just buy it and listen to it? And that'd probably tell you what you need to know. But what would you like to say about where you're going on the Stills Alone album?
I formed my own little record company because I just couldn't bear the thought of going through another committee to find out if everybody liked what I did. What I decided to do was just take my monitor system into the studio and sing for 4 or 5 days and pick out the best ones, and you know, and then see what happens, and basically have an album that was completely by myself. So basically, this is the first effort of my little record company that I'm going to do my solo stuff on. The next one, I'm going to get the best little rock and roll band that I can find, like 3 pieces, and play a bunch of songs. And basically, I want to do it real raw, pure, and simple.
Everybody's Talking, and In My Life, a couple of standards that you covered, although they don't sound anything like just knockoffs of the original popular versions.
Those are two. I once had an idea of I wanted to do an album of songs I wish I'd written, and that's 2 of them. And Hollis Brown was the one that started it, because that was one of the songs that I got that truly drove me into taking this up as a profession, was that one song.
Collection, and the only reason I'm holding it up again is that it certainly is worth it. And I thank you very much for coming by these 2 nights. That was awfully nice.
Well, thank you.
Okay. Stephen Stills, we're out of here. See you later.
I'll be careful with it, but if I can
scratch on it, I assume all responsibility.
We'll go spin and glide. You got no place to hide, 'cause you don't need one. All along the lee shore, shells lie scattered in the sand, winking up like shining eyes at me. From the sea, here is one like sunrise. It's older than you know, still just lying there where some careless way got it long ago. When I awoke this morning, I dove beneath my floating home, down below her graceful side in the turning tide. Watch the sea fish roll. There, I heard this story from the sailors of the San Marie. There's another island, it's a day's run away from here. It's empty and free. Nothing more to see than 100,000 islands flung like some jewels upon the sea. Thee and me, yeah, yeah. Sunset smells of dinner. Women are calling it meter and my tail. But perhaps I'll see you the next while.